Hello again, and welcome to our second lecture. So this lecture is roughly on the introduction to the Burbank and Cooper book, which is our primary text for the course. And there are some other readings to fill in some gaps that are in the Burbank and Cooper. But this is just sort of the introduction to the book, and it frames things nicely as sort of the approach of like what the course is about. Because again, right, this is a world history huge subject. So there's kind of a focus on the nature of empire and this trajectory from empire to the nation state, which is a sort of a conventional narrative, right, that will be questioned at certain points, whether it's quite so simple, right? So here are our authors here. Um, Jane Burbank and Frederick Cooper, they're both at NYU, and they are a couple, right, together. So the world we live in now is sort of dominated by what we call nation states. And you may have not have heard this term, but your sort of default notion of what a country is probably maps onto the notion of a nation state, right? Where um, your country governs more or less people of a single nationality, right? So, right, France is the political, right, the state that governs the French people, and Germany governs the German people, and so on. Now, of course, it's not that simple. People will visit other countries. You're not French. You can be in France but not be French, even though you're subject to their laws. There is immigration, right? Undocumented people and so on. So obviously, it's not a completely true picture, right? But it's a broad, general picture that like kind of neatly maps political entities onto nationalities. Um, so whether or not that's true, that's the picture, right, that we have of what a country is largely, and even that is a pretty new development. So for thousands of years before the last century or so, people lived on under various different sorts of arrangements. So call the political part state, right? Call the ethnic, cultural, historical bonds, whatever constitutes a nationality, call that a nation. Um, and yes, sometimes the state and the nation coincide rather neatly, right? But often we'll see throughout history attempts to make those to jam those two things together have been the cause of a lot of turmoil, right? So after World War One and World War Two, huge there were nation states, right? Germany, even at that time, you would consider a nation state, right? But at the end of this war, you have the big winners, right? England, Russia, and they're carving up all this territory, right? All these former colonies all over the world, and they're creating these new political entities, particularly right in Palestine in the Middle East, um, right where currently we have Israel and Palestine and two different nationalities, right, um, being jammed together and carved up in sort of unnatural ways. Um, and so attempting to create a nation, right, create a nation state, uh, often is the source of like decades of conflict, right? In other instances, this sort of conflict has been avoided by forming what we call federations. We'll look at federations a little bit later, where um, you can have sort of distinct nationalities that sort of coexist and work together at some level politically, but it's not, they don't attempt to sort of merge into a single uh, in quite the same way. So these nation states, be they relatively homogenous or, the source of a lot of conflict, federations and other forms of political organization that we'll talk about are going to be in this course largely contrasted with empires, right? So empires are these enormous political entities that really have no hope of ever attempting any sort of homogenous population that is of a single nationality. Uh, there's going to be national diversity, right? And it has to either be tolerated or managed in some way. And the overall point of this book is to look to the past, understand these empires that existed in the past, sometimes for thousands of years, um, before our current setup of nation states, or our relatively young setup of nation states, and examine what is that progression, right? And is the traditional narrative correct, right? Is this a uniform, predictable sort of progression from empires to nation states, which are now like the right way to do things, or can we question that narrative? One thing to look at when we're talking about empires is this necessary diversity that exists, right? Because they're so huge, because they're swallowing up territory and other groups, ethnic nationalities, cultures, going to have a lot of diversity in a giant empire, right? And it's just a fact of empire, and it's not always a welcome one for people that are trying to govern a giant empire. Um, so we'll often see attempts to enforce some kind of uniformity, some kind of homogeneity, right, on their subjects, be that cultural, religious, economic. Um, but sort of the other side of that coin is empires are largely economic engines, right? For an empire to stay in business, there has to be profit being made. And so that's going to put a pressure on how much homogeneity you can enforce, right? When it's not profitable to do so, often empires will not attempt to do so. Um, and sometimes, right, allowing for diversity will be uh, the easiest way to a peaceful and prosperous empire. And so we'll often see a lot of the time empires will tolerate quite a good deal of diversity. Right? So our particular nation state been around almost 250 years now, right? The United States, um, which seems like a long time, but if you compare this to, the 2,000 years of successive Chinese sort of empires, dynasties, the 600 years of the Ottoman Empire, uh, it's actually relatively short. So, time will tell how long the United States will be around and other nation states. Um, but so far, it seems like empire has been a particularly durable form of government. The longest living, right, political entities have been empires throughout the past. Now, on its own, that doesn't necessarily mean that empires are good or bad, right? Um, but given that, when a state, any kind of transition of this way, when a state collapses, there's a lot of suffering usually that's involved, right? So durability, there's something good about that. Stability, right, can be a good thing, predictability. And so that alone makes it worth exploring what makes these empires so durable. And is there anything that we can learn, right, from these sorts of empires? So this little uh, GIF here is of the growth of the Roman Empire. These are the dates, right? So we're at 220 BCE, and it keeps going, keeps expanding hundreds of years well into the AD, and then as the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, exists well into like the 1400s, 1500s. So very durable form of government. One bit of terminology that's going to be introduced in this book is what they call an imperial repertoire. Right? So we're going to study a lot of different empires. Each one is going to be unique, and there's no single blueprint for constructing and running an empire. We'll notice themes, but really there are as many different strategies as there are empires. Some of them will repeat the same strategies of others. Sometimes they'll be different. Sometimes they'll be different over time in the same empire. So rather than talk about, I don't know, one sort of monolithic imperial strategy, it makes more sense to talk about little repertoires, like right, little routines that they can find themselves using in different times in different areas that in a certain situation will come to be useful and then may have to be abandoned when it becomes less useful. So what strategies are open to a given empire at a certain time are going to be restricted by the technology they have in that moment, by the geography they find themselves in, and also just by the uh, imagination that they have, the worldview that they're sort of stuck in that moment, be it religious or philosophical or some sort of social cultural. Uh, that can be as limiting as a mountain range, right? So we'll also see that these strategies can be surprisingly flexible, right? And we'll see them employed over and over, right, over thousands of years. I hope I'm going to pause to say, so far this course has been sort of very abstract, right? The things I've been talking about, and it is a very broad course. And often history is most fun when you can talk about the specific stories about particular actors. It can be easier to sort of grab onto. So I am going to try to sort of latch on to, you know, the smaller, more specific, and the more relatable stuff. But again, this being the introduction of the course, I'm introducing some broader themes. So I hope that, in this lecture you can still follow what I'm saying, even though it's couched at a little bit of an abstract level. And hopefully in the discussion posts, you'll be able to think of something to say about these, even though it's rather broad and rather abstract. We'll get more concrete later on. Okay, so what empires are we going to be studying? We can't study every empire that's ever existed, right? We don't have the time. Um, and in fact, we're going to start with something that's not even an empire, right? We'll start with the Greek city-state. Uh, these are literally a city that is also a political unit, right? So in Athens, I lived in Athens. I was an Athenian citizen. I didn't consider myself, right, a citizen of some sort of Greek nation. I was just an Athenian or a Spartan, right? Um, so not an empire, right? Much smaller unit, but the Greeks are very important for introducing ways of thinking about what it is to be a citizen, what it is to be a political entity, and developing forms of civil life that inspire later empires, particularly the Romans. The Romans were very much believed themselves to be connected with the Greeks and to be continuing many of the Greek practices, right? So we'll start with the Greek city-state, sort of the background, philosophical background to later empires. Then we're going to look at the Roman Empire and the Qin empires. Um, the Romans were in the Mediterranean, right? Italy started in Italy and expanded to swallow up most of the Near East, up as far as England, right, as Britain in the north, um, and then the Qin were in China, right? And so, in fact, the word China comes from Qin, right? So Qin is pronounced Qin. These empires, we'll talk about them at the same time because they existed about the same time, right? There wasn't a ton of interaction, uh, but they were both enormous, right? Both roughly con con contemporaneous, yeah. And so looking at the two together allows for interesting comparisons and contrasts because there were differences. Rome was like largely a seafaring, right? It was around a large sea, right? And so trade could happen by boat. Um, China was largely a big landmass. Not a lot of north-south rivers, some large rivers going east-west, but travel, right, and trade were very different in Rome, and other differences as well, other similarities. So they're useful, they're interesting to compare next. We're again then going to cover sort of so the Western Roman Empire eventually fell, right? But the eastern part, right, Turkey and the Middle East, continued to exist as the Byzantine Empire, as Byzantium, into right the 1400s, 1500s, right? Um, and at that point, at a certain point, Rome converted to Christianity and became a Christian empire. So, right, Christianity was the state religion, and people were expected to be Christians, right? Earlier, Roman Empire had tolerated a lot of religious diversity. It was pagan, and if they had their gods, right, which happened to be the names of the planets, right, Mars, Jupiter, and so on. But if you had your own god, right, yeah, bring them on in. That's fine. That god exists too, right? Later Rome, Christian, right, monotheist, and then there are also Islamic empires, right, in the Near East at the same time, also monotheistic, also very concerned with everyone, right? There is only one God, and you better believe in them, kind of thing. So very different approach, right? And also interesting to compare. And these empires existed, yeah, long after the fall of the Western Roman Empire and long into, the Renaissance. Um, then we're going to shift to the Mongol Empire. So that was geographically the largest empire in history. And this was around the 13th century. So maybe you're familiar with this, but 13th century means 1200s, 14th century means 1300s. So very different empire structurally, right? So it began as sort of nomadic peoples, good with horses, right? So this has been back to the beginning of history. There's been this tension between sedentary farmers, right, that stick in one place and work the land, and then nomads on horseback that will travel around a lot. And one big advantage of the nomads on horseback is they can raid, right, the farmers anytime they feel like it and take whatever they want from them and then run away on the horses. So the Mongols were a horse people, and they had that sort of military advantage, right? And they began to gobble up territory and eventually, and they're also very good at, right, absorbing the technology and the knowledge of the peoples they conquered. And they were essential in maintaining these trade routes across Asia, right? Um, that are kind of the birth of this world economy, right? So when the Europeans became aware that there was spices and other, right, interesting things that could be traded in Asia, all of sort of the Spanish conquest and the era of colonization and stuff like that was sort of driven by this desire to trade with Asia. Um, and that was the Mongols were sort of central to creating that setup. Um, During this period, there were other really interesting and important empires that we can't cover, and it's a shame, right? India, Iran, Africa all had empires. Unfortunately, the book doesn't cover it. Um, I feel bad. I would love to have, yeah, a section about empires in Africa. I think next time if I teach this class again, I will. You recall, I got hired pretty late to this class, and I had to kind of put it together rather quickly, and I kind of based a lot of it on of the way this course has been taught in the past at Woodbury, right? So as not to change things up too drastically for people. Um, and Africa gets left out, and that's a shame. Right? That shouldn't be the case. Um, we will this The Burbank and Cooper book doesn't cover the American empires, right? The before contact with the Europeans, and that's a shame. And I will try to supplement that, so at least we can do that where we'll cover the Maya over there. So yeah, the Burbank and Cooper book is, as much as they try to be sort of like um, challenge traditional narratives, you always have to keep going, and you will find yourself still sort of sinking into the traditional story and thinking, oh, I have to talk about the Romans. How can I not talk about the Romans? I don't have time to talk about African empires, but we should always question that, right? Um, Maybe it would be an interesting class if you never talked about the Romans, right? And you just talked about other empires that don't get as much attention. So I wish I could do more in that respect, but I'm doing my best in this class. I'll always try to improve. Okay, so I already sort of said this, right? But these trade routes through Asia that were sort of established, maintained by the Mongols, all of a sudden Europeans become aware of the benefits of trade with Asia, and this sparks this era of European exploration, colonization. So there's the beginnings of little empires developing in Britain and Spain, Portugal. Um, at this time, they were not did not nearly match the scale of the Mongols and the Ottomans. So we're not going to cover those either, right? Um, in any detail. And instead, we will talk about the Ottoman Empire, which dominated the Near East at the time. They finally killed the Roman Empire, right, by conquering the Byzantine Empire, and so now they dominate, right, the Near East and access to the Asian trade routes, and this is what caused, right, the Europeans to go out in ships and look for another route to Asia and end up encountering Americans. Now, before the Europeans made contact in the Americas, there were empires there. So we're going to cover the Maya. We're going to have to look to a different text to do that because Burbank and Cooper don't really cover them in any detail. But that I'll post that reading for you. Um, so we'll cover the history of what happened when contact was made between these empires. There are similar stories all over the world in this sort of age of colonization, and they are largely bad stories, right? Stories of murder, exploitation, heroic resistance, right, on the part of the people they're attempting to colonize, and also the beginning of questioning the morality of empire. If you asked a Roman, is it wrong to vanquish your enemies and take all their goods and murder them, they would say, no, that's what great people do, right? That's just what the powerful do. But the face of the Spanish and Portuguese colonization started the beginning of people questioning the morality of this sort of right. And finally, we're going to look at the end of the age of the empires, right? The political and philosophical theories surrounding this. We'll look at Adam Smith, some Marx, um, that point towards this new political structure, the world of the nation state. So that is the broad overview of the course. Um, let's address a couple of definitions, right? So we've been talking about empires. We haven't tried to define it yet. Here's Burbank and Cooper's definition. Empires are large political units, expansionist, or with a memory of power extended over space, polities that maintain distinction and hierarchy as they incorporate new people. Let me unpack that a little bit. So empire's got to be big to qualify as an empire, right? A large political unit. And the empire is the political unit. It's distinct from the nationality or the culture or anything like that. We're talking about the political state, right? So an empire is a kind of state. Expansionist. So it's the idea of an empire is it's taking over new territory. Now, later in their lives, right, empires will tend to shrink, right? So we want to say those are still empires, right? But this is why the authors say there's a memory of power extended over space. Right? An empire exists to take over land, and even when it's shrinking and it's on its way down, it's still got that in its DNA, sort of. So their polities, again, a polity is just a political organization. The main distinction and hierarchy as they incorporate new people. So as we said, unlike the nation state, there's no assumption that an empire is totally homogenous and everyone within the Roman Empire Roman considers themselves Roman. You're going to have different people. You conquer a country of different people, and often empires want to maintain that distinction. They want to say, hey, we are the Roman citizens. You are the conquered people that are in our empire, and we want to make a hierarchy there, right? So often a hierarchy is attempted to be maintained. So that's unpacking that definition, right? So the empire contrasted with the nation state, which they define as a single people in a single territory constituting itself as a unique political community. So there's no talk about necessarily trying to expand, right? There's no talk about these hierarchies or distinctions, although definitely those can exist in nation states, right? But at least the concept of the nation state is something much more homogenous. Yeah, part of this is rhetoric, right? No nation state is actually a single people. There's always some sort of hierarchy, right, and some sort of distinction being made. Um, but the key idea, right, is empires is they expand and they the diversity just comes as part of the package, right? There's no way they can be homogenous or even pretend to be homogenous. And there has to be some sort of hierarchy there. So empires, we have seen come and go, right? Um, and that's because there's an inherent tension in the whole concept of an empire. So anytime you have power, anytime you have a political group or political organization, temptation to expand, right? You're going to want to incorporate new land, new wealth, new sources of labor. That's not only empires that want to do that, but empires are good at it, right? And keep doing it until they're very large. And, if you're one of these peoples that is conquered, it's not always a terrible thing. There can be advantages to being incorporated into a wealthy, well-organized empire, right? It can be business to be part of the Roman Empire, but there's also going to be people that don't want to be incorporated, right? So the fact that you have to expand to be an empire means that you're going to be expanding over people that don't want to be expanded onto, right? That don't want to be incorporated. Going to be all kinds of pockets and sources of resistance to the empire, right? That come along with that expansion. So any empire, as it expands, is always at risk of fragmenting, and some of those fragments may go on to become new empires. Others will become nation states. Here I have a picture of these Chinese kingdoms. We'll see when we get to the Chinese empires, it's a long story of expansion, fragmentation, right? A new empire rising, right? The Qin give way to the Han and so on. So this is definitely an internal tension in the empire, always at risk of dissolution. So we've talked a lot about empires and nation states, but those aren't the only kinds of states you can have, right? So tribes are probably the oldest sort of political organization. Right here is a Californian tribe of Native Americans, a contemporary one. So the tribes still exist, and tribes have probably been around longer, at least as long as humans, maybe longer, right? Neanderthals may well have formed tribes. No, right? Um, tribes can still be expansionist, right? They can still take war with other tribes, try to take over territory. They may impose certain hierarchies and divisions as well, right? On the basis of family, or there may be gender divisions or other kinds of status. So, in many ways, right, even a tribe is similar to an empire. At the very least, the size difference. But the Mongol Empire probably began as a confederation of tribes, right? Um, and they grew into the largest empire in history, right? So, tribe, yeah, you can start with a tribe and become an empire, right? There's no essential difference in principle except for the size. City-states we mentioned, right? So the Greek, Athens, Sparta, these were city-states, a different sort of organization, a single city, right? They didn't consider themselves to be a member of any Greek nation. They considered themselves culturally Greek, right? But they were Athenians, period, right? Um, so the Greeks called this kind of state a polis, and that's where the word politics comes from. Um, Involved a lot of the concepts that we still have, right? The concept of a citizen and what citizenship is, as we understand it, right? Being a member of a polis, you have certain rights and duties as a citizen. Now, not we think of the Greeks as inventing democracy too, and they were in some sense democratic, but not everyone was a citizen in the Greek democracy, right? So women and slaves did not have equal rights, right? Uh, but these states traded with each other, they fought with each other, much as nations do today. They were just sort of smaller in size, more local, smaller geography, but similar sort of types of political relations. A federation is another sort of political organization that's different from an empire or a nation state. Um, it's sort of a way of trying to avoid the hierarchy, right? And you can have diversity without, someone being on top and someone being on the bottom, and the resulting sort of tension and unrest that comes from that. So um, they can be organized however they like. There's a certain degree of autonomy that the various members have, but then there's also um, there can be some hierarchy. So one of the members can have more rights than the others, and so on. The EU, maybe you can sort of think of as a kind of federation, right? Russia's technically a federation. Um, and that throughout history, they've often been proposed, right? So there have been times throughout history when, at the end of World War One, where people talk of, well, maybe instead of trying to carve out force these nation states, maybe we should do federations instead. They're not as often implemented as they are proposed, but they're proposed as sort of an alternative splintering empire into nation states, and maybe as a way to avoid some of the conflict that sometimes seems inevitable. So, one important point to make, right? There's no fixed relation between whatever the political, um, what type of state it is, if it's an empire or a city state or whatever, and the form of government that they use. The Roman Empire was a republic, so vaguely sort of democratic, right? Um, you can have smaller non-empires that are very authoritarian, right? So just because it's a big empire doesn't mean that there's a single emperor that runs the whole show and that right dominates everyone's lives. No, it's not like you have these big, large tyrannical states with emperors that then progress towards our current smaller, mostly democratic nation states. You those things are independent. You can have a republican empire, you can have a autocratic nation state, right? So the last few slides, I want to talk about some of the themes that arise throughout the book, right, that will be revisited, and these are outlined in the introduction to the book as well. So the first is difference within empires. So again, as we've said, right, just the mere size of the empire and its expansionist nature means that there's going to be a lot of diversity within that empire, culture, languages, religions, and so on. And there were diverse methods of dealing with diversity, right? So some empires were very tolerant of these sorts of diversity. Hey, as long as you pay your taxes, right, and don't rebel, you can pretty much do what you want. Keep your religion, keep your culture, no skin off my back, right? Um, Other empires tolerated diversity so long it was very clear right, who the upper class and who the lower classes were, right? So I'm a Roman citizen, right? You are my slave. You can have your religion if you want, right? But just make sure you know I'm in charge, right? Um, Other empires tried to impose a single religion, right? And so, yeah, diversity was not allowed. There was much more attempt to homogeneity and, varying degrees of success with that, right? Look at Rome over its lifespan, it kind of tried all of these different strategies to one degree or another. Another theme that we'll see are importance of what imperial intermediaries, right? So if you've got a giant empire, right, and you're the emperor, you can't run the whole thing, right, by yourself. You can't micromanage. You need intermediaries to govern, retain the cohesion and far reaches of your territory. Sometimes what you do is if you're Roman, you take people from Rome, send them to the territories you conquer, put them in charge, and have make sure the Roman citizens are running the show. Other times you might conquer a territory, take a local, put them in charge, go home and say, just send us the tax revenue and keep order, and you'll make good on the deal, right? If there's a local person that's like the Romans all of a sudden gave you a pretty good job and you're making good living, and all you have to do is, make sure that no one rebels, you'll find people that are willing to do that. Other things people do is they'll go conquer a territory, kidnap some young men, or it's usually men, right? Bring them back to the center of the empire, away from their parents, right? Train them in the royal court, then send them back to the provinces as, good Romans or whatever. Um, so, these are strategies for keeping order, right, and keeping the empire together. But there, again, there's this inherent tension, right? So anybody in the far reaches of the empire that's in charge of their little area and they got a little power, they got a little money, they don't see right people coming from the center of the empire to their neck of the woods very often. At a certain point, they're going to start to think, why am I sending this money like back to Rome every month? Like, why don't I just keep it? Like, I don't like maybe I can just break away, and then you got the potential for integration, right? So these intermediaries are essential for maintaining an empire, but they're also sort of very dangerous and can cause the fragmentation of another general theme, imperial intersections. So uh, sometimes some empires, right, when they're at their peak, like Rome or China, uh, they've conquered so much territory that they don't really consider themselves to have any rivals. Right? They've got some barbarians at the edges of the empire that they have to keep in check, right? But they're pretty much the only game in town, right? Sometimes that's the case, but in other case, you'll have great empires that are like in regular contact and in regular competition with each other, or they might be in alliance with each other against another empire, and so on. So this sort of interaction is very interesting, right? When these great empires are in competition, right? Now this drives innovation, um, and also, of course, drives wars and upheavals and the disintegration of empires. And um, often these sorts of events are the catalysts that our current picture is Hannibal, right? The Carthaginian. So early in the Roman Empire, they had a big enemy. They were kind of roughly equally matched, the Carthaginians, right? And that um, kind of drove Rome to become Rome, having this really tough competitor, right? He's got the elephant there. Hannibal is famous for elephants in battle. Okay, and finally, last theme is imperial imagination and imperial repertoire. So the strategies you have for governing, fighting, trading, um, is constrained in part just by, current technology, current political situation, geography, right? Is there a mountain range in the way? What are the rivers? What are the opportunities for travel, for modes of travel? But just as often, it's limited by the imagination of the rulers, right? So your religious ideas, your philosophical ideas, political theories, um, those things that you accept, your worldview, that can shape the trajectory of your empire just as much as the hard facts, right? Um, so that's one thing to keep an eye on, right? Is what is the what worldview? It's one of the more fun things to do in history, and one of the hardest things to do in history is like, what is life really like that long ago? What do people think like? What do they act like? Um, I've seen crazy stuff like if you read Homer, right, the Odyssey, right? If you read ancient Greek stuff, they never talk about the color blue, right? When they describe the sea, they call it wine dark, the wine dark sea. Speculated, did they not know what blue was? Did they not have a word for blue? Did they even distinguish the color blue from other colors, right? It's like it's possible that in that ancient world, your whole world is like wildly different, right? So, um, always something to keep tabs on. What is the imagination of people at that time? And then imperial repertoires, right? So, rather than characterize the governing strategies of empires under labels, right? This was an authoritarian empire. This was a democratic empire. Instead, the text is going to employ this concept of repertoires of power, which is just much more sort of flexible and free-flowing strategies that are employed in different times, different regions, right? So, maybe in the city of Rome, right, it's a republic, but maybe in far reaches, they have to be a bit more authoritarian. Maybe for a short time, right, there has to be a dictator, and so on, right? So it's much. If you look at the details, it's going to be much more really appropriate to slap a label on any given empire. So the overall picture, much less rigid, much more flexible and diverse. I mean, we have these entities, the Dutch East India Company, right? This huge sort of sprawling company with immense money and power, right? That in many ways sort of looks like an empire, right? Even though it's not a political uh, entity in that way, right? But, again, or some people will talk about America as an empire, right? Even though we don't go around conquering countries anymore, but we do sort of intervene, right? And we often make sure that, there are people in power in other countries that are, interests align with ours, right? So is that empire just a different kind of empire, a different sort of repertoire? Possibly, right? So we'll talk about all these things. So uh, that's it for this lecture. Hopefully that's, uh, what are we at? 37 minutes. Hopefully that's a reasonably bite-sized sort of amount. Oh, you can rewatch these if you want. Back at the text, right? Stay in touch with me. Again, I want to sort of, in asynchronous class, make sure that everybody still feels like they're connected to the class, or whatever I can do to help with that. I will see you next time.